So, we're halfway through the 2020s, an idea that's really messing with my head. A few days back, I shared my picks for the 10 best movies of the 2020s thus far. The movies that made me love movies the most. Today, we are heading in the opposite direction. The movies which felt so cynical, ill-conceived, or incompetent that they made me dislike movies. Here are my picks for the 10 worst movies of the 2020s thus far. Hi, my name is Sean, and I love to talk about movies and TV way too much. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comments section. Share your picks for the worst movies of the 2020s thus far. My list is not the right list, it's just my list, and I would love to see yours. As we go into this, these aren't supposed to be like objectively the 10 worst made movies of the 2020s. No, art is more subjective than that. These are the movies which represent the things that I think are broken in the film industry right now. They're the movies that frustrated me the most. These are the movies that specifically represent something that I found disheartening in how I view movies. With all that said, let's get started. Kicking things off, Rebel Moon, Part 1, Part 2, Director's Cut, the whole nonsense, all of the malarkey.
That's a bunch of malarkey!
Now, I'm a Zack Snyder fan. The idea of Zack Snyder doing his version of Star Wars sounded great to me. The execution here, I thought, was just so boilerplate, so generic. It's too overtly Magnificent Seven, Seven Samurai, Battle Beyond the Stars by Zack Snyder. It's just his version of that. It hits all the same beats. It doesn't bring anything fresh and new to the table. On a plot level, character level, very dull in my mind.
I kept coming back to it because I really had something to say about the sort of tropes of sci-fi. There's got to be a why of it, and how do we break it?
But the thing that so pushes it onto this list is that they did this whole cynical, ill-conceived 2 cuts of the movie.
In the R-rated versions of the movie, everything is amplified. The R-rated versions of the movie have a slightly more satirical, the PG-13 movies end up being pretty earnest. They don't have sort of sex and violence to over the top them. That in the R-rated versions, because the violence is so over the top and the sex is so over the top, that the tone changes.
The reality is that there's not a whole bunch of 13-year-old kids that are just chomping at the bit waiting for Zack Snyder's PG-13 version of Rebel Moon. Zack Snyder's fans are grown men. They're dudes that want the version where limbs are cut off, blood spraying everywhere, that, as he described it, has the over-the-top violence, over-the-top sex, that it's weird, it's all the craziness. That's what Zack Snyder fans want. So the idea that they did a PG-13 version to justify the budget to play to a broader audience is just so ill-conceived. You know where you can find the PG-13 version of Rebel Moon? It's called Star Wars. It already exists. The thing that we want out of this is the Snyderisms, the weird, crazy R-rated stuff. That's how he's wired. He's an R-rated kind of guy. And so the fact that they did the whole 2 versions and they released the director's cut way down the line, I think it was a disaster. Having him promote it that way, another disaster. I didn't think it was particularly enjoyable because it was so bland, so by the numbers. And then the multiple versions thing just put such a bad taste in my mouth, and it felt so cynical, like they're trying to manufacture their own Snyder Cut movement. Number 9, Ghosted, Red Notice, Heart of Stone, or whatever other big budget, star-studded spy streaming movie that they crapped out. There were so many of these that have come out over the last 3 or 4 years, and you might enjoy one of the ones I mentioned here more than I did. I enjoyed some of these ones more than other ones. Some of them had a little bit more of a charm to them.
They kept asking me about the tax man.
They asked you about the taxman?
They think I am a tax man. You're the tax man.
Oh my God.
But it's this category of movies that they have openly admitted are designed for streaming and the streaming experience not to be the best movies that they can possibly be. the filmmakers at times have openly admitted that this is the case. Specifically with Ghosted, they talked about their use of AI, their use of studying streaming data, so they optimized the movie for watch time on a streaming service rather than to be the best movie possible. That's the goofy stuff that YouTubers do that lead to the Mr. Beastification of YouTube. That stuff. And they're doing it with streaming movies where they know this is a genre that people broadly like. They like movie stars, and they'll see a movie star they recognize, a film they haven't seen before, and on streaming they're likely to click on it, and then that's design the movie to like give a mental kick to the person to get them to stay every so often to line up with the way people watch movies on streaming. They've openly admitted that is how they designed the movie Ghosted, and Netflix also is doing that stuff. They just might not have fully admitted to it. And so this is just a category of movies that has given streaming movies a really bad name because they all are so generic and they're just completely forgettable movies that make absolutely no mark.
Been having a strange reaction to this picture. I liked it while I was watching it, and as soon as it was over, it didn't mean anything to me. And as the days have gone on, it's meant even less, if that's possible.
And that they're tailored for an algorithm is the part that just makes it gross. Number 8, The Exorcist Believer. This is a movie I went into with a lot of concerns because they hired the person that did the previous trilogy of Halloween movies. And after Halloween 2018, I don't think he did a particularly good job continuing that trilogy of films. But more importantly, Halloween and Exorcist are very different movies. That's not a profound thing to say, but they work and they are scary and they are iconic for radically different reasons. And being able to bring back Halloween with a solid legacy sequel is not remotely the same thing as being able to bring back The Exorcist. It's a totally different bag of tricks and requirements from a storyteller. So I went in very nervous, and it seemed like every concern that I had was realized on screen, where I don't feel like they understood The Exorcist at all. And by the end of it, it felt like it was insulting to the audience as well as the original film. They brought characters back for virtually no reason. The first half plays out just like another generic exorcism movie. And in the back half where they tried to pull some stuff together, it legitimately kind of offended me, where the original is so deeply Catholic, and I'm not specifically Catholic, but it's a movie that is built on the foundation of Catholicism. That's foundationally the movie. And you move into the third act and it does like this Exorcist Avengers thing where all these different faiths come together. And that really bothers me, that you start to undo the foundation of the franchise for your whatever modern point you're trying to make about religion and universalism or whatever. But it takes an absolute classic and converts it into just another bad Blumhouse exorcism movie. And that, to me, is one of the worst things that you can do with a movie. Real quick, I wanted to plug my second channel, Sean Chandler Plus. I actually have 2 different movie channels. Here on the main channel, it's like movie reviews, rankings. They're kind of these videos that are heavily edited and structured. The second channel is a lot more editorial. It's a lot of clips from my live streams, and so my personality comes out a little bit more, gets a little bit more niche. It talks about movie news a little bit more, editorializing. So if you kind of want a different flavor that's not quite as edited, a little bit more freeform, tackling a lot more subjects, a little bit more spice and personality to it, consider checking out my second channel, Sean Chandler Plus. Number 7, Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey. And this to me just felt like such a cynical move, where Winnie the Pooh went into public domain, so they made a totally generic slasher movie and put a very cheap Winnie the Pooh skin on it. And because of the gimmick, this sweet, innocent childhood character is murdering people. People bought tickets to it. They printed money for themselves, but they didn't actually do the work to try and deliver on the promise of the premise. There is something kind of funny, kind of clever about turning Winnie the Pooh into a killer. The subversive nature of childhood innocence turned into this horrific nightmare. There's something there that could be really interesting. And this movie didn't deliver any of that. It is so bland, devoid of wit, devoid of creative kills, and it doesn't dive into anything that actually makes Winnie the Pooh unique. With the characterizations, the lore with Christopher Robin, really, especially the wordplay, the meta humor, all this stuff that Winnie the Pooh is known for, that wouldn't it be fun to see that translated into a horse? None of that's there. We could just sit here and brainstorm fun plays on classic Winnie the Pooh imagery, quotes, the word, any of that stuff. And none of that is in this movie. And that to me is where this just felt like such a cynical move, where they knew they had a cute gimmick that made for easy marketing that would sell some tickets, and it worked. To be fair, the second one is a lot better. The second one is closer to what I just proposed. Credit where credit's due. They're getting better as their budgets go up. They are listening to the feedback. But this first one did not deliver.
This is the worst.
Number 6, Thor, Love, and Thunder. Now, over the last 5 years, there have been a number of MCU films that really didn't work for me. I'm not a fan of Eternals, but at least I respect that they tried something different. I just think they picked the wrong format for it. Really don't like the Marvels, but at least I find that to be a watchable movie, primarily because the ladies have chemistry, and Iman Vellani in particular is very charming. But Thor, Love, and Thunder took a franchise that I thought was heading in the right direction after Thor Ragnarok, an MCU movie that I really enjoy. And I think that this is a complete and total misfire. And it had all of these incredible ingredients. They're doing a Thor movie that has the Guardians of the Galaxy in it. And then they had this idea of what if we tackled the theological problem of evil with Thor. That is a fantastic idea for a serious Thor movie. And what do we get?
And flick. Oh.
Who can say where the road goes?
We get the goofiest, most irreverent MCU movie that they have ever put out.
It's time for another good idea, bad idea. Good idea.
Hiring Oscar-winning dramatic actor Christian Bale to play your villain.
Bad idea.
Putting Oscar-winning dramatic actor Christian Bale in the goofiest movie in your entire franchise. There's a subplot about basically a love triangle with Thor's hammer.
You serious?
All in a movie that deals with Jane dying of cancer, a lead character struggling because his daughter died, and I mean, it's just like a tonal disaster, and that's the problem with the movie. It's too irreverent. There's a line of like balancing his irreverence that Ragnarok did really well. It went up to the line but didn't go too far. It still took the material seriously. Here, nothing is sacred. Everything is a joke. This movie is one of the absolute worst films in the entire MCU that does not work on any level. When I rewatched it with my wife eventually, a year and a half after initially watching it, I was shocked at just how bad I thought it was and how much worse it was on second viewing. And there's screaming goats. Number 5, Jeepers Creepers Reborn. Now, given that this franchise's peak of popularity was now over 20 years ago, and the very serious and real controversies surrounding the creator of the franchise, Victor Salva, I have no idea why they thought we needed to bring this particular franchise back. And if you're going to do it, Why would you do such a bad version of it? On a story level, it's just incredibly boring. The first 2/3 of the movie is just dedicated to two people going to a horror convention, which is as dull as you would imagine. And it's only in the last third where people start getting killed. Like, there's probably as much time in this movie dedicated to the lead girl trying to pick a costume as there is to the creeper killing people. Like, that's how weird this movie is. There's no tension or atmosphere. It's also a horribly executed version of all of that, where almost the entire movie feels like it was shot on bad green screens. Every shot just has this artificial feel to it. Simple things like people standing in a room in a rickety old broken down house feels entirely artificial, because it was. Everything. They weren't on any sets. They didn't go to any buildings. They just shot everything on a green screen. And so it feels shockingly cheap, which goes back to the original thought on here. Why would you bring back such a controversial franchise if you were going to do such an unbelievably bad job of bringing the franchise back from the dead?
This is pretty much the worst video ever made.
Number 4, Disney's Pinocchio. Now, I would declare this just another cheap, low-effort Disney Plus movie designed to milk an existing franchise. But I can't do that because it cost $150 million and had way too much talent in front of and especially behind the camera. Here, Oscar-winning director Robert Zemeckis teamed up with Oscar-nominated screenwriter Chris Weitz to remake one of the most praised Disney animated films of all time, has a 100% on Rotten Tomatoes, and it stars multiple Oscar winner Tom Hanks. There's not a weak link in the chain. There's some of the best of their fields here. They had the budget and they're pulling from the best source material you can that they have. And they delivered one of the most lifeless and cynical films of the entire year. There's literally a scene in this movie where we see Geppetto's clock shop, 19th century clockmaker, and apparently Geppetto was either a time traveler or an incredible visionary because he owns a bunch of clocks featuring Disney characters.
Are you kidding me?
Just like one of these little things that they did, whether it was a cheap effort to promote Disney products or just winking at the camera for the audience, it's just blatant nostalgia bait. It's a moment that exists entirely to remind you that you're watching Disney Plus content. And that is so cynical. Why does this thing even exist? And as best you can tell, the reason that this movie exists is because Beauty and the Beast made $1 billion and they went, all right, what else can we put out there that might make $1 billion? It's so cynical that they're treating their like absolute classics of cinema content to be mined. Classic art is just content to be mined.
Don't ask questions. Just consume product and then get excited for next products.
And Oscar-winning directors, nominated writers, and winning actors are just McDonald's workers. McDonald's managers, McDonald's workers, bringing nothing to the table, no artistic flair, just working for a big, gigantic corporation. It's gross. It's so cynical. And that, to me, is the worst stuff we've been getting of the last 10 years. Real quick before I go into my final or dishonorable 3 on here, I did do a video talking about my favorites of the decade, more positive video. Be sure to check out that video, balance things out. What's the good? What's the bad? Also, I did my end of the year list just a few weeks back. I did a most anticipated list. Did a video talking about my box office predictions for the big hit movies of the year. So all of those are somewhere around here. I'll link them, pin a comment, something like that. 3rd, Borderlands. Now, I never played the Borderlands game, but a big sci-fi adventure with dark humor sounds like my kind of thing. And it's a movie that they spent a long time trying to get made. And there were different writers attached, directors attached, and finally they started getting motion on the film about 5 years back, where they had a script from Craig Mazin that, according to reports, was really good. Through that, Eli Roth got attached to direct it. They were able to attract a bunch of high caliber actresses to be some parts in this movie. Now, did they fit the video game accurate versions of the characters? No, they did not, but you are attracting extremely high caliber talent to the project. They shot the movie back in 2022, and then they started to do reshoots on it. They brought it in 2021 is when they shot it. Shot in 2021, and then they did reshoots 2 years later. After they did the reshoots, the writer, Craig Mazin, demanded that they remove his name from the project, and so suddenly a pseudonym, something Crombie, Mr. Crombie, depending on where you see it, it's Abercrombie or Mr. Crombie, is credited for writing the movie. Probably Craig Mazin. He claims it's not him. And then after the movie came out, the stunt coordinators of VFX people were like, yeah, we shot a very R-rated movie. And, you and Eli Roth, you did all these really nasty horror movies. That's the movie that we shot. Very R-rated. But whatever was going on with this movie, there were too many cooks in the kitchen. There were too many people tweaking it, fiddling around with it. And so that script that was apparently really good back in 2020 got so changed that the writer was like, I want out of here. I don't want anything to do with this thing. This is not the movie that I wrote. He took his name off of it. Everyone else is saying they kept fiddling with it. And the product that we got is just kind of a mess. That what is paid off in the third act is not set up in the first two acts. Things that are set up don't go anywhere. There's sequences where clearly they had a 10-minute sequence and they trimmed it down to a 30-second montage. It is a mess of a movie and a perfect example of an overproduced film that was produced and manipulated and tweaked to death. And I don't think it represents anyone's vision for what they hoped Borderlands could be. Our next to last one on here, Home Sweet Home Alone. Hey, do you remember that they put out a new Home Alone movie just a few years back? Did anybody rewatch that one last month? No, of course not. You just watched Home Alone 1 and 2 with Macaulay Culkin. So back in 2019, Disney acquired Fox right as they were preparing to launch their streaming service, and they wanted Fox to be able to have more content to populate their streaming service and access to more franchises to do sequels and remakes of more franchises to populate their streaming service. And that's exactly what they did. They grabbed hold of Home Alone and they went, all right, we got Home Alone. We can do a new one now. And thus, in 2021, we got Home Sweet Home Alone. I suppose it's commendable that they chose at least to add some new ingredients into the mix and not just do a shot-for-shot remake. But for some reason, the big change they decided to make was to make the robbers sympathetic. There's a big, gigantic problem here. The whole thing that makes Home Alone famous is that in the third act, a child booby traps their house to protect their home from robbers. Thus, the robbers who are threatening to kill a kid, trying to rob them, break into the house and are tortured horribly for 20 minutes straight. The whole comedy comes from, we are okay with these bad people being tortured horribly in these booby traps. So, what's the change that they decide to make? Make the robbers sympathetic. That doesn't work. If I like the robber, if the robber is properly motivated and not motivated by greed or wanting to hurt a child, I do not want to watch them being tortured. I don't want to see them bonked on the head or anything else.
You think I'm that stupid?
Yes, I do.
The whole concept of the movie implodes. It does not work. The whole entertainment factor is completely lost if I'm not entertained by watching this person being tortured. They got hold of a franchise and then we need content for our streaming service. And so they just completely cranked out this movie without stopping to think, does this actually make any sense? Does this idea complement the franchise and the appeal of the franchise? But my pick for the worst of the 2020s thus far, the circus of Spider-Man-less garbage from Sony. Kraven the Hunter, Madam Web, Morbius. Where they put out Venom back in 2018, and it made almost $1 billion. And because they were completely out of touch with their audience, they didn't understand why Venom was successful. They learned all of the wrong lessons and just started cranking out this crap. Now, the original Venom had a lot of script issues. It had a lot of storytelling and pacing issues. But Venom is a popular character. Tom Hardy is a very charismatic actor that's not afraid to be weird, and there's a certain charm to that film. So despite its many obvious flaws, it was a success, and it had a pair of sequels that were also successful. Sony, their big takeaway was, look, you can make almost $1 billion making a Spider-Man movie without Spider-Man. You don't even need a good script. So, suddenly Morbius, who is not nearly as popular as Venom. And then we're doing Madam Web. Like, there's no demand for the prequel to the origin story to 5 D-grade Spider-Man side characters. And then you get Kraven the Hunter that we didn't think Kraven the Hunter was a strong enough Spider-Man character to be the villain in a mainline Spider-Man movie. But we think he's a strong enough character to headline his own movie. And Sony thinks you're stupid. They think that just because it is a comic book movie with superficial connections, very superficial, sometimes fake connections to Spider-Man, that you'll buy a ticket for the movie. And they're so cynical and gross about it that they'll put fake shots in the trailer of Morbius walking by a painting of Spider-Man on a wall, and they'll throw Vulture into the trailer. And they'll do all this superficial nonsense garbage. And they think we're dumb and we'll buy tickets. We're not stupid. They're stupid. This was a dumb, cynical idea for a franchise all along the way. And then they executed a bad idea somehow even worse. All of these movies have sloppy as can be scripts. All of them feel like movies that were reshot, reworked in the editing room, and they were duct taped together with ADR.
From what you read and you signed on for Madam Web to what we see on screen, was there a lot of changes or not so much?
There were drastic changes. And I can't even tell you what they were.
And they never improved any of this stuff. They just, all of them were just utter garbage. And they thought we would eat up the slop because they teased that it's kind of related to Spider-Man. Nope, Sony, we're not stupid. You are. So you are the worst of the 2020s thus far.
And the idiots who made this film are taking 2 hours of my life and robbing it from me in order to give me less than nothing. Yeah. I mean, a movie like this is a crime.
Hey, remember I got the counter video to this one with my picks for the best movies of the 2020s thus far. Please check out that video. Also remember I have a second channel where I do kind of more editorial, movie news, kind of a little more freeform stuff. You can check that out somewhere around here too. Thank you so much for watching. Keep talking movies and TV too.